Welcome to the Skagit Valley and Whidbey January 2023 clinic, sponsored by the NMRA 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region. And our clinic tonight is JMRI operations with modules, how that our operation scheme has evolved over time. And I'm the presenter, Rich Blake, and I'll go ahead and jump into it. So if you have questions or anything, I have an intermission in the middle, and then you can put your questions on the chat, and then I can answer them at the end. And I see there's a few module guys that are on here also, so they're probably interested in what we've been doing with our On30 group. So in this clinic, I'm going to talk about how we have evolved over time with this Pacific Northwest On30 modular group. We've been around since about 2008 is when it officially started. We didn't actually do any shows until about 2011, and then really got going 2012 at the Seattle National Narrow Gauge Convention. And since that time, we've kind of learned how to incorporate operations into modular club, let's say quote, club operations. It's been kind of a challenge. It's very interesting. Lessons learned that we've had. And in this clinic, it's just basically a source of ideas of how we did stuff, and show, and choosing JMRI as our operating car forwarding system. And it's just a way that we've done it. It's not necessarily the right way or the only way. It's just something that we've done. So maybe, you might learn something from it. One thing that I have to say about our group is that they've been very, very enthusiastic. And without that, this wouldn't have been very successful. And I can say, like today, I'm very proud of these guys because we really have a good organized group, and everybody does exactly what they're supposed to do, and it runs very smooth. Some folks who have operated on railroads, model railroads before, kind of have an idea of what we're looking for. We're just trying to simulate what we can out of the prototype. But for the modular group, there's a lot of folks that didn't really have a lot of experience in operations, or they, had never been to an operating session. So there was a big learning curve for a few folks. And so one of the things that I kind of really honed in on with the operations is like, we really needed to give people something to do and give them some focus and provide them with, something other than just running trains back and forth. Cause that's kind of how we started. We didn't have an operations plan. No one, was even thinking about that except me in the back of my mind. But, so a couple of, first shows that we went to first couple of years, we basically just ran trains back and forth, and ooh and awed over the scenery and stuff running and making sounds, and spectators to talk to. And, people want to talk about, how you built stuff or what kind of structures, kits you have or whatever. So, I mean, it's still fun interacting with others, but at the same time, that only goes so far. It keeps us entertained for so long before we're like, okay, this is boring. I'm going to go look at some stuff at the train show, and then I'll be back in an hour or whatever, or I'm going to go eat lunch and sit around for an hour and talk to people. So there wasn't really a lot of focus on the layout after like the first day of a train show, because usually train shows are over a weekend. So the first day would run trains back and forth and have fun. And then, the next day it's kind of like, okay, when is this over so we can pack up and get out of here? So the operations give the guys something to do. And it also, at the same time, as they get more experience, then they become more interested. And as they become more interested, then, that leads them to maybe doing a dispatcher certificate for the NMRA, or getting involved with op sessions and kind of expanding their experience with model railroading. And also the last thing, is once we start really operating seriously, we get to find all the bad track segments and all the bad switches and mismatched coupler heights. And the last thing, of course, there is to have fun. So some of the unique issues that we have with modules in particular is we needed to come up with a method of car forwarding. There's all kinds of, we'll talk about that here in a minute, but there's all kinds of things that you can do for that. But that's like the main thing. Like, how do you give the trains purpose? And so you need some way to control car forwarding. The other thing we had issues with is our inventory and markings. With the On30 models, those are mostly Bachmann models that you ready to run straight out of the box, and you can put them right on the layout and run them. They got couplers and everything on them already. So we had, everybody had a lot of their own equipment, but it wasn't really controlled, so to speak. Locomotives, we had a lot of various locomotives. Some of them ran really well. Some of them didn't run too well. So those needed some work. And then the other thing is that for our modules in particular, they're set up differently every time we go to a different show. So depending on how much space they give us, we're going to have to configure the module set to match that space. I know a traditional module groups usually have maybe a large oval setup with maybe staging in the middle or something like that. And they're, kind of set up the same way or sort of the same configuration. Ours is different every time. So that makes it pretty challenging. Another thing is there's never enough time to prepare or to control everybody. We didn't really have any rules and regulations, so we needed something like that. And then again, not everybody knew what to do concerning formal operations. So for our car forwarding methods, some considerations we looked at was car cards and waybills. That's probably the most popular, where every car has its own card, and usually a 4-cycle waybill that goes from point A to point B to wherever, and you just flip it every time the car moves. So it guarantees that the car is going to move somewhere every session. And we could have did something like that, but the limitation with car cards is that, especially for a 4-cycle, the car is only going to go 4 places. And we didn't necessarily know what those 4 places were going to be before a show, because we didn't know what the configuration was until we designed it for that particular show. So every show is different. So the 4-cycle waybill with locations, specific locations, it really wasn't going to work. Plus you have to have, some way to control the car cards, because you have to hold them in your hand. You got to put them in a box. And it was just too much. So scratch that pretty quickly. The next one was switch lists. Consider just writing manual switch lists. That's a consideration. You could do that if you don't have very many cars. We didn't have very many cars to deal with because we're, small, narrow gauge layout for the most part. But at the same time, it's a lot of manual write-up, and not knowing how the layout's going to be configured ahead of time or too much ahead of time. We only have like a couple weeks to prepare, really. It would have been a lot of work for somebody to do, to figure out, how to manage a switch list to hand out. And then once that switch list is completed, then what do? You got to write another one and get them going again. So we scratched that out too. Just too hard to do, and it's not perpetual. So then I started messing around with JMRI operations. I didn't have any experience operating with JMRI. I've mainly used it for programming decoders and stuff, but I saw that there was an operations module in there, and I did start kind of playing around with it, and reading, the tutorial and stuff and figuring out how it works. And once I started looking at it, it's like, okay, this thing, combines the waybill routing, switch list generation. It, can accommodate the modules as individual locations, and then I can move those locations around in any order that I want to at any time. So before any show, I can move all this stuff around. And then once you start running trains and everything's getting placed where it's supposed to be, the cars, get placed where they're supposed to be, then you can run it perpetually. You just keep running it over. You just keep generating switch lists over and over and over again. And it's going to update depending on where all the cars are at and tell you to move more things. So going with JMRI was pretty much a no-brainer once I figured out what it could do. So phase one was basically figuring out we need two things. We need car inventory and we need locations. And once we have that, then we can generate routes and then trains and then create switch lists for those trains. There's a whole lot of other options that JMRI operations can do. And there's, probably hundreds of videos on YouTube that you can look up and see what JMRI does for larger, more complex layouts. But we wanted to just use it to generate switch lists with the least amount of effort to get trains moving with some kind of purpose. So our phase one is like, how can I distill this down to be the simplest thing, yet do the most work for us and create an environment where we can actually run trains and do something without having to continuously update something. So the first thing I had to do really was inventory all of our equipment. We didn't have a baseline. Everybody just had stuff. Sometimes we'd go to a show and people would buy stuff at the show and throw it on a layout and it's running. So there was really not a high degree of control over a lot of this stuff. So we had to like reset ourselves and go, okay, let's start an inventory and figure out exactly what we have so we can put it in the computer. And one thing about the Bachman models in particular, especially the On30 ones, is they look nice. They have decent details on them and stuff, but they don't necessarily put numbers on them. So they didn't have any unique identifiers. There's no road names on some of them, and no road numbers. So you'd have to put that stuff on there yourself. And I didn't expect everybody to do that up front. It's just, okay, I'm going to try and deal with this with no numbers and just using a car type or something to get this going. So the first thing we did was created a Excel spreadsheet. And on the spreadsheet, we had everybody inventory their equipment and add it to the spreadsheet. So we had a Yahoo group initially, and now we're on groups, groups.io. So we could communicate on the internet because we all didn't live in the same area. We lived all over the place. We had a couple guys down in Oregon, had a guy down in Long Beach Peninsula, some couple guys in Olympia. So we're all over the place. So we couldn't really just get together and do all this. So we had to do it all online. And so that's what we used the Yahoo group. So anyway, we had this master database, and one of the things we did is we assigned each individual a unique 2-digit number to identify themselves. So everybody chose their 2-digit number, and that was going to be used for locomotive addresses, which we'll see later, and just as a general ID to make sure that everybody has something that belongs to them. So like we use NCE DCC system, and you have to have an address for your throttle, and we would try to stick with the person's ID number for that throttle, that kind of thing. And then so all the details were put into this database with the type of car it was, if it had a road name on it or any ID marks, and then numbers if they had any numbers, although that wasn't initially that important. The length was important, and the type of car was the most important. And then once we had that, I was able to create a file in Excel and export it as a CSV file. And there's a method where you can import that directly into JMRI to build your car roster. So we had something like, I don't know, 60 or 80 cars to put in there. I could have hand jammed all those in there fairly easily. But I already had the Excel database with everybody's information, so I just modified it and created that export file and then imported it into JMRI. And just note that I'm not going to go through each of the steps to do this stuff in JMRI. Like I said, you can look up on YouTube. There's a lot of good tutorial videos on how to manipulate all the different features of the JMRI-ops. I really don't want to get to that basic level. I'm just kind of skimming over the top of how we used it and what we did with it. And at the end of the presentation here, I have some links to a couple of those videos that you can review if you want to. Once we're building the roster, the left side there, you see a sample of a screenshot of what the car tab looks like in JMRI, where it has the car number, road name, type, length, and then the loads and stuff. That doesn't really matter for what we're doing, empty or loaded. And then it has a location, so it tells you where that car is at, if it's actually on the layout somewhere, and then if it's attached to a train, where it's actually going, and then what train that it's on. But what I found out was, if my second bullet there, if I use the hyphen before the running number, when that car is assigned to a switch list, that number won't show up on the switch list. So what it ended up doing for all the cars that didn't have any numbers on them, it just gave them a fake number and put a hyphen next to it. So I used the person's ID. The first 2 digits is their ID. And then, car number 1, car number 2, car number 3. It didn't matter because it didn't have any numbers on it. So I put that hyphen. It got the 2-digit ID, and then whatever number of car it was I was putting in the inventory, use that as their running number, and then put what type of car it was and the length, those which are the most important things, and then entered that into JMRI for the car roster inventory. So what it ends up happening when we did that is that the operations become based on the car type, not the numbers, because you're not going to see a number on the switch list. All you're going to see is move boxcar to wherever. And that's how we established our initial inventory. So phase 2 of our car inventory is, over time, it didn't take very long. Over time, we got everybody to put numbers on their cars. And it took about a year or so to do, but, in a couple shows. But once we got to the point where most of the cars had numbers on them and we updated them in the JMRI database, then, we could get a little bit more prototypical switch list built from that. And then, now we're at the point where we don't allow any new cars on the layout or to be added to the inventory unless it has unique numbers and a road name on it. So we've evolved from, just using the car type to what you would think as a traditional car forwarding method by using those road names and car numbers. And then all I really had to do in the database is just, some of these cars would just take the hyphen off and put the actual number in there. All right. So once we had our car inventory built, one of the other things that, runs in parallel with that is figuring out the module locations and the routing and how to manipulate that in JMRI. This is a shot from Monroe. Module location variables again. So we're always a point-to-point layout. There's a yard on each end, and all the modules are. One thing that has benefited us a lot is that all the modules are stored in a CAD file that one of our members keeps on hand. He's a good CAD guy. So all the modules are drawn to scale in CAD. And so whenever there's a show, we either, sometimes we've been able to go measure the location. But most of the time they just give us a space, a floor, a floor part of the floor plan. They give us this, here's your space. And so we set up the modules. Each module is its own individual CAD layer that can be moved around. And so we set up, the map with the available modules, first thing you gotta do is figure out, okay, who's going and what modules are you bringing? And then once we know that, then we're like, okay, here's all the modules that we have available. Let's figure out how we can make them fit into the space that we're given. And that's kind of how it goes with the CAD program, and it's scale, so it's pretty close to exactly how it's going to be in that space. Sometimes we run into issues where there's like maybe a power pole thing in the middle somewhere, or maybe something on the floor that we have to avoid. And so we'll just deal with that on the fly when we're at the site and setting up. Because again, it doesn't matter which way we put the modules together. It's kind of a Fremo setup, so we can adjust on the fly if we need to. It's just that our master map may not be correct at that time. We'll have to update it, on site. So for JMRI, the modules become their own locations. Like I said, you need a car inventory and you need locations. Those are the two main things you need for JMRI. So, typically your location would be, whatever town, on just a permanent layout. You got this town A, town B, maybe there's a yard between them and some staging on either end or something. We're kind of using that same scheme, except town A and town B, could be town B and town A in that order, or it could be town C and town D or whatever. So all that stuff can move around. So each module is its own location within JMRI, and we can move those locations around for routing as necessary to build our trains and stuff for that particular show. So in this here, it kind of explains how every module is its own location. So this is an example of the Camp 4 module that has 5 industry tracks on it. So there's 5. This is a screenshot of this right here is a screenshot of JMRI and the location selection for this module, and it lists each track, A, B, C, D, and E, and what the length is of each of those tracks, this scale length. And then in this particular case, this must have been an active JMRI screenshot because there's some used space in there, because there's probably a couple cars in these spots. But anyway, this is one location, and then this is saved as a location in JMRI, and then that location can be moved in the routing anywhere you need to. All right, so routes. So once you have all your locations built, then you can start doing routes. And routes, there's just this bottom one here. This is the routing. So this is just one example of where we had a location that was staging, and I actually named it staging off layout. And so it's not actually a staging track or anything like that. It's just a location in the computer that you can stuff cars into and use it as staging. And it could be a 050 staging where you have to pull a car out of a box and put it on the layout. And then you have Olympia Station, the Idaho Southern narrow gauge farms there, Camp 4, and then these dairy farms. So that's the route that you're eventually going to use for a train to take on the layout, and that would be in the order that those modules are set on the layout. And then also in here you can set how many moves you want to do on that layout or on that module location, so more or less switching. And then you can set the max length of the train, so you don't want it to be any bigger than probably your largest passing siding. So you can set those things so it only stuffs so many cars on your train. And then you can add comments and all kinds of stuff in this routing also that'll show up on switch lists that can be used to good effect if you have specific things that you need to indicate for different locations, like pick up passengers, wait 5 scale minutes, or, service locomotive, add water, wait for, however many minutes. You can put that stuff on the, in the comments, and it'll show up on the switch list. And then the final step after you've built your routes, which is, how the modules are set up from A to B, then you can build trains. And a train is simply something that you can name that uses a route. So these routes you've already built, and you're just assigning a train to that route. And then once you've built that train, then, or created that train, then once you execute the build function, it's going to build a switch list for that particular train. For us, most of what we do is eastbound, westbound. So left is west, right is east. So as you're looking at the front of the, whatever modules you're looking at, you always know which way is east and west. So that makes it fairly easy. And so you can put north and south and east and west in JMRI, but we'll only stick with the east and west. And some things you can also do with the routing is, some modules might have a lot of facing sidings. You can set it so that the module that has a lot of facing sidings is only serviced by a train going in one particular direction, so it doesn't have to use those facing sidings, or you can just skip that module in your routing. To make it a little bit easier train for folks, because you can have easy trains, you can have hard trains. It just all depends on what you want to do. And you can also see on here, there's different, there's like branch line trains that are ready to go on here for and all these different routes that are being used to drive those. And then the last thing I put down here at the bottom is that all this stuff is going to happen only if JMRI knows where all the cars are at or where they're already located. That's the key, because you don't have car cards where you can just put a card with the car. That's probably the best part of car cards, is you can physically put the card with the car at its location. Where here, as an operator, you don't know where that car is supposed to go or supposed to be unless it's on your switch list. So if you show up at a location and it says pick up, boxcar 23 from track B, and you look at track B and that car's not there, like, okay, what happened? That's probably because the last guy didn't put the car where it was supposed to be and he took it somewhere else. So when that happens, we have to go like, okay, just don't worry about that. Just complete the run. And then I either have somebody, the dispatcher or somebody will go try and find that car and then update it physically in the computer where it's actually located. So then that happens every once in a while. And so here's some examples of switch lists. This is one that only uses the car type. So that was our phase 1 car inventory and operations method, where we are only using the car type. And you can see how the switch list produces that, where you just picked up flat car empty from staging track 2 and skeleton from staging track 3. So you don't have to, it doesn't matter which one it was, it's going to pick it up. As long as each of those cars, if you go back to you think about the slide that I had before where I had the hyphen before the car number, as long as every car number is different and it has that hyphen next to it, JMRI is still going to treat that car as an individual car, and it's going to track that individual car all over the layout. But what the operator sees, or the conductor sees when he's actually operating, is I just need to pick up a flat car. And then this is an example of our phase 2, where now you have a lot more details on the switch list. Pick up the SVR hopper 108 from any track. And I'll explain how this any track thing works here in a minute. You come down here a little bit further where you got scheduled work at Byron Sawmill, set out this boxcar 102 to Crossing Long. That's a name of a track. And then it tells you, how many cars you should have when you depart that location before you go to the next one. And also at the top, you can see where some of the comments have been entered, where like this one says that all trains must have a combine or a passenger car in lieu of a caboose at the end of a train, since it's a mixed train. And then there you have the clearance required before you're departing the yard. And then eastbounds are superior for trains of the same class. All right, so staging for us, this is how we do it. I don't know if it's accommodate, you can accommodate it on any module group, but I think you probably could, as long as you have a way to access all the various cars fairly quickly. So, you have JMRI has the ability to do spurs, which is what you mainly use for industry tracks. The difference between spurs and yard tracks, anything can be a spur or a yard track, or even an interchange track. The difference is a spur track is considered an industry track where something's going to come in either loaded or empty, and it's going to leave in the opposite condition. A yard track is where things are stored before they move on to the next train. And then an interchange is kind of the same thing, where one train drops something off and another train takes it to whatever its destination is going to be. So we don't use the interchange track a lot. I have used it in the past for like branch lines and stuff, which works pretty good. But that's probably a whole clinic in itself on how to control the tracks and how they're treated. Let's just say that for staging, JMRI also has staging tracks that you can assign. But the way that JMRI treats a staging track is that you have to have an entire train built and placed on that staging track. And you think of a traditional operating railroad, that's usually how it's done. The staging tracks are where trains emanate from, and then where trains end up at the end of whatever run that they're doing. So you're moving full trains from one place to another, and JMRI is set up for that. But we don't necessarily use it that way, because that would require us to actually set up the train ahead of time and kind of set up staging ahead of time. And we don't really have that much room. So what we do is we basically split the layout in half, and half of the cars are assigned to the east side yard and the other half are assigned to the west side yard. And what I did in the yards is there's at least one track in the yard that's 2,500 feet long. Now it's not actually 2,500 feet long. It's just what I call ghost staging. So it has enough space to accommodate as many cars as we want on that particular ghost track. So that it allows us to have, cars ready to go, and maybe a tray or something at the yard, so that when you start building trains that emanate from that yard, the program's going to pick up, however many cars to make the length of the train that you've pre-assigned for that route. So let's say 200 feet. So it's only going to grab, in our case, it's only going to grab like 6 or 7 cars. And so it tells you, these are the cars I need for the yard. And the way that we have the yard track set up is all the yard tracks have the same name, but they're tack 1, tack 2, and tack 3. You can see that down here. So anytime there's a hyphen used to name something, that number does not show up on whatever switch list you produce. So only thing that the operator sees when they see the switch list is pick up boxcar 23 from any track. Pick up boxcar number 47 from any track. That's all they see. So it doesn't matter which track that they stuff on, because I always have way more track in JMRI in the yard than the amount of cars that we actually have. We'll never exceed the yard capacity. Now you could restrict that down and treat it like a traditional yard. But it doesn't give us we didn't do that because it just doesn't give us the flexibility to allow the yard master to do whatever they want with the yard, stuff cars wherever they can, and also allow us to use the yard as ghost staging to put, 50 cars on one side and 50 cars on the other side and just have them, turn it loose. And this is how we start each show, is you do the same thing. You set all the cars in the inventory in JMRI so that you got half on one side, half on the other, and nobody puts anything on the layout once it's all set up and we're ready to run until we've, got the cars set where they're supposed to be, and then we start running trains. So that the layout will populate itself. So each train you run east and west from emanating from those yards, it's going to grab cars, it's going to drop cars off, and then it's going to end up at the other yard. And then when you run the next train from those same yards going the other way again, it's going to drop off more cars and it's going to pick up a couple more. And then it's just going to keep perpetually dropping off and picking up cars throughout the layout until the whole layout's populated with cars on all the different spurs. And then this is just an example of a configuration that we've had in the past. I think this was in El Walco. A little bit more compact, but it has a branch line in there, which has to be managed in JMRI. So you have a lot more routing that has to be incorporated to be able to run trains throughout, because you got trains going from one end to the other, from yard to yard, and then you can have trains going into the yard or into the branch and back to the same yard, or into the branch and over to the other yard. There's all kinds of different various possibilities you can run to keep it interesting for your operators. And this looks like either a Monroe or Puyallup, a lot larger layout space. We can see where there's, module sets where there's passing sidings and stuff. But again, it's point to point. We got 1 yard over here and 1 yard over here. And basically JMRI just runs the same way. It's just now we have more modules or more locations that we can put into our routing to create our switch lists. All right, so what about locos? So JMRI has a locomotive feature where you can enter your locomotives in there and it'll assign locos to trains. We don't have that kind of organization as far as loco control to allow JMRI to do it, because they have to be available all the time. So we have a lot of people and everybody has their own set of locomotives and everybody wants to run their loco. So we have to kind of mix and match, who's running what, when, and stuff like that. So it's very dynamic which locos are running at any given time. So what we've done to kind of control that is we've created some DCC key cards for each locomotive, because everybody has their own. So we have all these cards that are available that have been filled out with the various, function features and stuff for each individual locomotive. And so when a train is assigned and you have a crew assigned to that train, they may not get the locomotive that they want. They're going to get the locomotive that they get assigned, and then they'll get the locomotive card, and they can use that. They use that to figure out, what the DCC address is, and go run that loco. So we don't use the JMRI locomotive assignment feature at all. We just let the dispatcher or the yard master handle that. We also always have a standalone programming track available that's connected to JMRI. We try to avoid doing a lot of goofing around with locos though during the show, unless somebody is dedicated to do that. Sometimes we have somebody who's not really doing a whole lot and they have time, and we can sit around and mess around with some locomotives. But for the most part, we try to encourage folks to do all that testing and tuning at home before they bring their stuff to the show. And again, this 2-digit address thing really came in handy, especially for the locomotive assignments, because all of our locos have 2-digit side numbers on them, and a lot of them are duplicates. So in order to separate the DCC addresses using the first 2 digits of the person's ID and then the locomotive number, kept all those locomotives individual, and there was not a lot of confusion over, what the DCC address is supposed to be. Right. So rules and regulations, we had to come up with a a method to control people basically, and set some basic ground rules and standards. What's the superiority of trains, how to throw and reset turnouts, what the standard sound signals are supposed to be, what's your speed limits, how to couple and uncouple stuff, just basic rules. We have little flags that we can post for Rule 99 throughout the layout. If you're switching in an area, you can put a flag out and to indicate that you're working an area. So I just had to come up with something to standardize, what the general operating rules are. We didn't get too fancy with it, pretty basic kind of brochure style, but it helps a lot to consolidate the information and make sure everybody's on the same page. So a lot of folks ask, how do we have our setup, the locomotive or layout control system. And this is just basically just a kind of a block diagram of how we have our system set up. So we got a track bus, this NCE command station. All the modules have a LocoNet cable connected to them. They all have a universal throttle panel, so you can connect a wired throttle to any module. And then we also have, what's cool is we've adapted a Raspberry Pi little micro computer that has JMRI running on it on Wi-Fi. So you can hook up, Wi-Fi throttles or the engine driver application on your cell phone or a tablet and run trains, over Wi-Fi. You don't have to have a wired throttle. And then the operations computer is a standalone over here in the corner. That's a standalone computer hooked up to a printer to do the switch list and stuff. We keep that separate just because we don't know where it's going to be located. We could hook it up to the layout and run everything off of the computer. We've done that in the past, but it's nice to not have the computer dedicated to the layout, and being able to just do whatever you want to do with it with the JMRI-ops feature, because you don't need JMRI-ops to run the layout. A separate computer on a separate Wi-Fi system can do all that for you. So that's how we run the layout. So this is my break spot for questions on just JMRI in general, if anybody has anything.
You start with 050ing the rolling stock onto the layout at each end.
Yes.
You have to make one move to get that out of the way, or how does that start to put more and more rolling stock on the layout?
You have to imagine everything's on, you got half on one side and half on the other side. And you just, for simplicity, I got an eastbound train and a westbound train that are ready to go in JMRI. So all I got to do is just hit build on those trains. The cars are already set on those yard locations. So it looks at that, because that's where it's starting from. It's starting from the yard. So let's say the eastbound train looks at that inventory of cars that are in that yard, and it just randomly picks which ones it's going to take to move through the layout. And the way JMRI will pick stuff is it looks at all the locations, all the locations that it has to go, and it looks at what cars are required on each location. I kind of skipped over some of that because I didn't want to get too deep into how the operations things works, but it is important where you can set what kind of cars that each track on each location can accept. Like if you have a coal facility, you want that to, receive and discharge coal hoppers and nothing else. I mean, it wouldn't look right with a reefer on that track where there's coal at. So you can manipulate that in JMRI for each location spur track to indicate what type of cars that track will accept. So when it starts to build a train from a yard, it looks at all the cars that are available in the yard and what types they are, and then what's required throughout its route. It's like, okay, I need I can pick up, I need box cars here, I need a gondola there, I need a flat car over here. So it'll pick those kind of cars up, And then once you run that train, it's going to drop those cars off, at the locations that it chooses, and then end up on the other yard. And then when you run the other train going the other way from the opposite yard, it's going to do the same thing going in the opposite direction. So once you've run a couple of trains from let's just say time zero, once you ran a couple of trains, you're going to have a lot of the layout populated with cars on the sidings because those trains had dropped off cars that they pulled from the yard. And all the operator has to do when they get their switch list at the beginning is, it's like, I need this car, this car, this car, and that car. And they just pick those cars up from the tray that's sitting next to the yard and puts those cars on the yard. And sometimes we'll pre-populate the yard with cars at random. We'll just put half of them here and half of them over there, and they're already in the yard. So when the first switch list is generated, the first thing they have to do is start switching the yard to actually build the train, because all the cars are there, but they're not, of course, in the order that they need them, or what type of cars that they need. They're all, in different tracks and stuff. So, and the way the switch list generates a switch list for, like this example here, this is from a yard right here. So it's basically telling you, pick up these cars from any track, except for this rip track, which is part of the yard. So all 5 of those cars are getting picked up from wherever in that yard. And they could be located anywhere because we just placed them on we had the 50% inventory on this yard, and we just stuck them on whatever track that was open. So hopefully that makes more sense. So when you start that first switch list, it's just going to tell you to grab whatever cars it's looking for from whatever track that it's on in that yard.
So now you've built your train, you picked all the cars, built the train. Do you tell JMRI that train's leaving?
Yes. So
and then do you identify when it drops the cars at certain, because the first run there'd be no pickups, it'd be all drops.
Right.
So do you say when it gets to the west side, if it's going east to west? Do you identify that it's here in the east side, or west side now?
Yes.
Stop.
So in the routing, so this routing right here, you see a train direction.
Yeah.
So you're telling it which way it's going. And then within the individual locations, you can tell that location that you only want to service trains going, you want that track within that location to only service trains going east. So this westbound train is not going to do anything for that track in that location that's designated as an eastbound track. That's how you could control facing and trailing movements. But yeah, every route that's created, you have to tell it which way it's going so that it knows what to do if there's any specific trackage.
Does you as operators generate that list, or is that done by JMRI?
You mean this one? This one?
The one you just had.
This one?
That's one you guys identify.
Yeah, these are screenshots from in JMRI. So this is part of the graphic user interface in JMRI itself.
So I still don't get the connection between the 050 populating the layout and how JMRI knows where those cars are on the layout. I understand the any track thing, but I don't understand how my cars that I have 050'd onto the layout, how does JMRI know that they are there?
Right. So back to the staging thing, like this one, if you look at this is a screenshot from this yard right here. One of these tracks is actually set in JMRI as 2,500 feet long. So that's like 10 times longer than what we need. We could fit every single car we have in our inventory on that one track. So what that's being used as is basically an extended staging track that can store any amount of cars that we have. So what we do is when we're setting locations for the cars, I don't know if I have here's a screenshot kind of. So you could, this is a car inventory right here. You can see with this location, it tells you where that car is at. So when we set those cars up initially, like the 50% of cars that are on whatever yard, we'll select all those cars that are available and put them all on that one track in JMRI. So you can select a whole bunch of cars at the same time in here using the control key, and you can set them all at the same time to whatever track location that you want. So let's just say, for example, I selected all of these and set them, and go back to this, wherever it's at. I would set them on this any track 1, 2,500 feet, and set them on that track. So now JMRI thinks that all those cars are sitting on that track and it's in Mark's yard. So it doesn't matter where those cars are at in Mark's yard, because JMRI thinks that they're all on that one track. And when the switch list is printed out, it just says any track. So does that make sense?
Hey, Rich, I can add to this. I think I sense where he's heading with this.
Yeah, go
But
ahead.
once the cars are on the track, you identify, tell JMR that car's on the 2,500 foot yard.
Well, that's all set up ahead of time. So we know which, so we
Oh,
physically know.
you already, you have to, you identify all the cars ahead of time and enter it, and then they have to be on the layout.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but now
or available at that location. Yes.
okay,
So
so I
the
think,
very first operator has the challenge of picking out those cars that are currently listed on the 2,500 foot long track and assemble those into a train. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
so now I think I know where he's heading with this question, Rich. The first run in from each direction, the operator has his assignments as to where to drop cars. And then when he finishes his run, he takes it back to the dispatcher, and the run is determined to be complete. That sets the cars for the next pickups because you know the run's been completed.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So just, JMRI basics right here is, so as a dispatcher, the dispatcher has to run all this on the computer screen. And so once a train is built and somebody's running it, you have these actions here where you move the train. So what that's going to do when you push the move button, it moves that train to the next location that it's supposed to go on, whatever the switch list tells it, whatever the routing is. So every time you move it, it's going to follow that route. And during that move, it's going to move those cars in the computer to wherever they're supposed to go. So you keep moving until the train gets to the end of its run, and then this will change to terminate. And when you terminate that run, that means everything has moved from wherever it started to wherever it told it to finish. And then it will update the inventory, the car inventory locations here based on where those cars were supposed to move to. So now the next time you run a different train going the other direction, it's going to be looking for those cars that the previous train had dropped off, or some of them, whatever. It's all random. It's going to be looking for those cars though at those locations. The computer knows, like, every time you hit move for a train, okay, I move, this car there. Okay, now I move that car over here, and now that car is over there, and the rest of the cars are in the other yard. And then when you run the next train coming out of that other yard, going the other direction, it knows that those cars from the first train already moved there. So it can use some of those. And then as it goes across the layout going the other direction, it goes, hey, that previous train dropped off a box car right here, and I can use a box car, or I need a box car to execute my random car forwarding to go to the next yard. So I'm going to pick that box car up and take it. So this is key to controlling the layout as far as when the operations are running, is that as a dispatcher, you have to update the trains as they're moving across the layout. Otherwise your car inventory is not going to update, and you're going to end up with, you don't know where anything's at. So
Can you start a westbound and an eastbound at the same time?
yes,
And
and that's normally what we do. That's kind of what we do most of the time is we constantly have at least 2 trains running at a given time, and they're usually eastbound, westbound, and they have to meet somewhere on the layout. There's usually a set meet. There's usually a
they
set
won't
meet.
make any pickups. They'll just drop off each one of them.
No, they'll pick up. So after the first couple of trains, once
Well, and that's
the
the first 2 though.
they won't pick up anything
Okay.
usually.
Right, because you started off the session where the only cars were in the 2 end yards.
Yep.
Yeah,
So you don't pre-populate the layout on the sidings and the industries. You
No.
allow the first 2 or 3 trains that are being dispatched out of the west and east yards to pre-populate or to populate the layout. And then
Yes.
as the chess pieces move, the computer says, oh, I have stuff to play with now. So let's make things really evil.
Yes, exactly. Now we have pre-populated the layout in the past, but what that does is it makes the dispatcher's job like infinitely harder, because now you have to go into every individual car that's placed wherever and locate it in the program. So there's a lot of manual input when we do something like that. And I used to get frustrated when we started doing this, because people would show up at the show, we'd get all the modules set up, which is stressful enough. And then we just start pulling stuff out of boxes and throwing it on the layout. And then they have cars all over the place. And it's like, okay, I have no idea where everything's at. And the computer has no idea where everything's at. So now we have to go and inventory every single car that's placed on the layout somewhere and what track it's on. I mean, JMRI allows you to print out a location list that lists every single track for every location. It's a several page document long. And so what I'd have to do is print that out that has all the tracks on it, and then walk from one end to the other and look at every single car and see where it's at and write it down.
right.
And it would take, almost at least an hour, maybe
Mhm.
sometimes closer to 2 hours to do that.
Right.
So that's when the decision was made. Okay, don't put anything on the layout, please. Let's just keep everything in our ghost staging, and we'll use the 050 method, or just put everything on the yard, and we'll just tell JMRI that everything's in the yard and start building trains from there. And then
So
Yeah.
when you put the 050, the cars in the yard, do you identify them as load or empty at that time?
no, we don't even use that feature. That's a different feature
So it's
that,
just moving cars.
yes.
So we're not really moving freight, you're moving cars. So JMRI says, okay, well, that car is there now. I need another one over here. Just pull it over there.
Right. Now
Okay.
we could do that. We could set types of loads and empties, but that's again, that's a lot more preparation ahead of time that would be required.
Yeah,
Um,
I can see that.
trying to keep it, a reasonable level of involvement and complexity without having to spend a whole lot of time setting things up. So just a fine balance between simplicity and complexity. And it works pretty good for us. I mean, I do have a lot of locations customized for what type of cars that they'll accept. Because we have some industries that can only take certain things that make sense, right? Like a gondola at a coal facility, or a hopper. Like I said, you're not going to put a reefer in that spot. So I got it set so that it only accepts certain types of cars. I also have trains set up where they only or locations set up where they'll only accept cars or switching from trains going in a certain direction. So what that does is it keeps the layout from getting clobbered from somebody having to do a bunch of runarounds and facing switching. I mean, we still have a few modules that we do facing switching and stuff on, but there's other trains that can make a little bit simpler where they only have to do trailing point switching and just move from one end to the other without a lot of fuss. 'Cause
Now,
we do get clobbered sometimes with too much switching, let's say, in some case, or the person that's running it is not that efficient, so they're taking a lot longer than normal, and then everybody has to wait for them to finish their job. So it's good to have a balance of easy jobs and hard jobs, but don't put all the hard jobs in at one time. Kind of balance them out.
because you're point to point.